Our next speaker is talking about the role of failure and adversity in becoming a leader. Please welcome on stage, it's a great honor, Mr. Nitin Paranjpe.
Thank you all for inviting me here. It's a privilege to be here with all of you at this very special event. I say it's a privilege, but it's also daunting. It's daunting because I'm following General Shukla and had some incredible speakers before that. Mazreen, who started off, Mr. Shroff, Mimi, who spoke about listening and empathy. And here I find myself and you find yourself with me. What I propose to do over the next 20 minutes or so is share with you one seminal experience over my long working life. An experience triggered by what I would describe as a chance encounter with a professor. A chance encounter which resulted in my carrying out several human experiments. Experiments which shaped my views about leadership and what the role of leaders should be. This story started in 2008 when, quite unexpectedly and to my utter delight, I was appointed as the CEO of HUL. It was a company I joined as a trainee 21 years ago, so you can imagine how I felt at that moment. The next few weeks and months felt like, well, a honeymoon. Yeah? But we all know that honeymoons don't last. Yeah? This one didn't too. But honeymoons don't always have to end in a nightmare. And my start as a CEO was about to end in one. And the reason for that was quite simple. Many of you would remember that 2008, we had the global financial crisis that started in the world. Now, while India was spared the worst of that financial crisis, the economy here also got hit. Markets came under pressure, and growth for our business nearly stalled. And here was I, a rookie CEO, just a few months into the job, with absolutely no experience, no understanding of what it would take to deal with that situation, a sort of situation that none of us had experienced before. We tried many things and none of them seemed to work. And with every passing day, I was having this sense of unease, sense of helplessness, and even a sense of inadequacy at that moment. And that's what was happening. And at that point in time, quite inexplicably, I have no idea how and why, a memory of an incident which had taken place 10 years ago came flashing back to my mind. That was my interaction with Professor C.K. Prahlad, who used to be on the board of the company. And that interaction had taken place in 1999. I remember that interaction. Professor Prahlad was sitting with a few of us, young managers at that stage, and he had asked a very simple question. What does this company need more of to be a greater company than it is today? I was young and somewhat flippant, and I said we must be entrepreneurial. And that set off the next set of questions. What does that mean? What's the difference between a manager and an entrepreneur? And I responded as one would, about agility, risk-taking, etc., all the obvious answers. But none of them seemed to satisfy the professor. And then he went back where there was a flip chart at the back of the room. And he went there and he wrote two equations on that flip chart. The first row was the first equation which said A is equal to R. And the row below that, he wrote A substantially greater than R. And having written those two equations, he turned around and beamed at us as if that was explanation enough. Now, it didn't mean anything to us. And he teased us a lot longer. I'm not going to do that with any of you today. But at the end of that, he simply went on to say that the only difference between a manager and an entrepreneur is the relationship between these two alphabets, A and R, where A stands for ambition or aspiration and R stands for resource. When A is equal to R, the first equation, He said that's when you are in a managerial mindset. And in some ways we can all relate to it. Yeah? Managers are meant to manage resources. Many of us can understand the conversations. Some of us might even have had it. When our bosses come to us and say, I'm going to cut your marketing budget, or I'm going to reduce the people that you've got. What's our immediate reaction? Reduce my target, reduce my goal. I'll give you some more money, I'll give you some more people, I could probably achieve a little more. And Professor Prahlad went on to say it is this linearity, this equality almost between ambition and resource is a defining characteristic of a managerial mindset. Yeah? But there is no entrepreneur worth his or her salt who would ever let their aspirations be contained or curtailed or limited by the resources which they have. Often most of them are resource starved. They often might have a penny in their pocket but aim of going to the moon. And they would never let that aspiration be contained. And it is this mismatch, Professor Prahlad said, this mismatch between ambition and resource, which an entrepreneur is very comfortable living with and a manager is not, which is the driver of many things. It is the driver of innovation. It is the driver of creativity. It is the driver of finding new ways of doing things. And that's how they come up with new ways of stretching this limited resource to achieve the larger aspirations that they've got. And when that happens, he went on to say, what does a good entrepreneur do? He changes this ambition again. So once again, you start living with this mismatch between ambition and resource. Professor Prahlad said something else. He said, a necessary condition for innovation is a mismatch between ambition and resource. Because when A is equal to R, all you need is efficient execution. Yeah? I remember walking out of that room mighty impressed. But I'm embarrassed to say that I soon forgot about this incident and did nothing about it for the next 10 years. Till, towards the end of 2008, faced with adversity, at a loss of knowing what else to do, feeling inadequate and hopeless, this memory came back to me. And not because of any wisdom, because I simply didn't know what else to do, I said, okay, let's try an experiment. Experiment and see what sounded good in theory, does it actually work in practice? Now we had to step up growth. We couldn't wait for the next big innovation to come and save us. So we decided, rightly or wrongly, that let's focus on expanding the distribution reach of our company and take our products to more stores. Now I'm going to use some numbers. The numbers don't mean very much, but they're designed to give you a context. At that point in time, the company used to go to about 1 million stores. Every week, our sales force would go to 1 million stores in the country and distribute our product. We were the most widely distributed company. The next best was about 700,000. And yet, the company, every single year, would want to expand its distribution by 25,000, 30,000 outlets. We would keep expanding so that we retained our leadership. And the question in my mind was, if we were doing about 25,000 a year, what might be an ambitious goal to set the team? Would it be 50,000? Would it be 75,000? Could it even be 100,000? Now, I don't know why, and it sounds stupid and foolish when I utter that number, but the number which crossed my mind at that stage was 500,000. Now you can imagine, the first time I uttered it, nobody believed I was serious. Yeah? But I kept repeating it. And after the initial incredulity of the people listening into this, and even I'm sure the coffee machine conversations would have happened as to see what happens when people are put into leadership positions. They lose all perspective with reality. Yeah? After all of that, when people realized that I wasn't going to let go, people started working on it. Mind you, neither did I or anyone else believe we would come anywhere close to it. Yeah? So it wasn't as if there was any hope. But within weeks, I started noticing something was changing. The nature of conversations were a little different in the company. A little while later, I could sense there was a palpable change in the energy of the organization. There was a degree of buzz. You couldn't define it, but you could feel it. And a short while later, the team came up with some breakthrough ideas which changed the economics of distribution and would allow us to go much further than what we had gone before. To cut a long story short, that year, we got to the 500,000 outlets, which no one in their faintest dreams had an idea or an expectation that we would get. Yeah? But that's not the purpose of this story. Now, clearly something was happening. I didn't understand it. How was it possible that the same set of people with the same resources were delivering outcomes which were so wildly different from what they were doing before? It wasn't as if people were coasting earlier and sitting on their backside. They were busting their gut even earlier. What was happening? And I didn't understand it at all, but even though I didn't understand it, I wanted to push it and see what the limits of this were. So, against conventional wisdom, when everyone was saying, let's consolidate on these gains and get the benefit of these 500,000 outlets, I said, no, let's try and get another 500,000 outlets. And once again, there was some disbelief. But this time, the objections were a little more modest. At least some people had begun to feel the joy of doing something that no one had done before. And we started working on that 500,000. That year, we ended up with 600,000 plus stores. And that then, even I still didn't understand it, but somewhere in me, I was this thought, does it only work in sales or could you try it in other parts of the business? So we tried it in our supply chain. We even took it to our legal function and said, see whether we could get exceptional outcomes out there. And wherever we tried it, we saw outcomes which were well beyond what anyone had expected. Now the question really was, what was happening and why was it happening? Because if we understood this, there was a chance we could replicate it, we could bottle it and apply it more widely. And then, one moment, the penny dropped. I visualized what might have happened had I gone to the sales director, not with the number of 500,000, but with the number of 50,000. Remember, we used to add about 25,000 a year. How would that conversation have been? In all probability, the sales head would have told me, Nitin, this is wildly unrealistic. He would have pulled out the last few years of data and shown we've added 20, 25,000 every year. How can you get to 50? And we would have negotiated. And at the end of the negotiation, we probably would have come up with some number like 35, 40,000 outlets that we're going to add. And he would have walked out of that room feeling uncomfortable, feeling a little done in by his boss, not having any idea how he's going to get that number, and convincing me along the way that this is a super stretch target, the 35 or 40,000. And would he have been wrong? Not at all. We had never crossed 25 and I wanted him to do 40. Is it a super stretch target? Of course it was. But something different happened when we started off with 500,000. I'll tell you what didn't happen. Guess what didn't happen? Negotiation didn't happen. Yeah. Why? Because 400,000 is 300,000 is as stupid as 500,000. So what will you negotiate to? Yeah. Now, this brings me to the question, why do you negotiate a 50,000 number but not a 500,000 number? Because 50,000 was in the same paradigm. He was expected to hit that number. If he had come up with 35 or 40,000, he had failed. He had no idea how to get there, and there was that fear of failure which gets him to want to negotiate that number. But 500,000, there was no fear of failure. Nobody expected to hit that number. Yeah? So there was no fear of failure. And I discovered that the fear of failure was replaced by something else along the way. The joy of working on something pioneering. The joy of working on things that no one in the world had done before. And that is an uplifting feeling. That is a feeling which generates positive energy, positive creative juices. It drives innovation, creativity, collaboration. That's what was happening. The fear of failure is a debilitating emotion. And what happened with that 500,000 versus the 50, by changing the paradigm, you moved someone away from the fear of failure to giving them a chance to experience something that no one had done before. And when I understood this, I realized, my God, there's a big lesson in this. A lesson rooted in human insight. Every one of us wants to be a hero. Everyone wants to do heroic things. Unfortunately, the fear of failure often prevents us from even attempting to do things which might be heroic. Yeah? And tragically, many of us could go through our entire lives without knowing the depth of potential that we have because we are simply too afraid to fail. And with this understanding, I came to the conclusion that it almost is the obligation of a leader. It is the obligation of the leader to provide a chance for his people to do heroic things. And then it means that a mismatch between ambition and resource is a necessity. Without that, there is no chance. Now, as you listen to this, some of you might be wondering, is it as simple as simply setting a hugely audacious goal and magic would happen? Of course not. That would be unbelievably naive. Two other conditions need to be in place. At that point in time, and all of this is, by the way, my understanding after the event, there were two other conditions need to be in place, and they happened to be there. I hadn't pre-planned it. It was serendipity in many ways. What is the first of these? The first is that people must want that outcome. People must badly want that outcome. And for that, you need a compelling vision, a compelling reason, a compelling purpose. And when I talk about compelling vision, I do not mean the lovely slogans that we have at the end of a conference of a big vision, which generates energy and excitement, but the half-life of all of that? 1 week, probably 1 weekend. Yeah, that's what it is. But a compelling vision is one which meets the high bar in my mind of two things. It must be collectively inspiring, but it also must be individually relatable. Why? Because let's face it, each one of us is in search of meaning. Meaning in our life, meaning in our relationships, meaning at work. So if there's anything that you do, any vision, any goal, where people are able to see meaning in that, they're able to relate to that, it adds to them, then they don't want to let it go. It's very precious. That's the first thing that needs to be there. And then there is a second thing that needs to also be there, and that is trust. The team has to believe that the leader has their back. The team has to believe that they have a license to take a swing. In the absence of that, setting audacious goals would be the worst thing that you can do. Because in the absence of that, forget getting people to experiencing the joy of doing something pioneering. You are likely to paralyze them into inaction. You're likely to make them feel like victims. Yeah? I cannot overstate that. That condition is vital. And with that understanding, I then thought to myself, if that's how things work, the essential role of a leader has to be boiled down into only three things. First, co-create, find, do whatever you want, but find a vision. Find a vision that meets this high bar. It has to be collectively inspiring but individually relatable, that people will not let go because it means something to them. That's the first goal of a leader. The second is to build trust. Trust, psychological safety, you can use any word which you want, but a place where everyone has a voice and no one's afraid of using it. That's the second. And the third, the leader has to create an opportunity for people to do heroic things. That's what people want. And for that, a mismatch between ambition and resource is a necessity. Without that, you are not giving your people the chance to do those heroic things. You're not giving your people the chance to explore the depth of capacity and potential that they actually have, and you're failing your team at that moment. These three things become crucial. Over the next many years, I had the opportunity to experiment with this often after I'd crystallized this. And I found every single time that these three conditions coexisted simultaneously, magic happened. Magic invariably happened. But having all three of them exist at the same time is hard. It is very hard. Despite my effort over the last many years, my strike rate remains modest. Yeah? And in some ways, improving the strike rate has been my goal, my journey, my path to growing as a person and a professional. Thank you all for listening.